A waitress saw the vampire king's daughter sitting alone under fluorescent lights, her untouched fries going cold, and made a choice that violated every protection protocol. She slipped her own worn bracelet onto the tray with a note. "You're not invisible." Everyone thought the girl would ignore it, but she put it on immediately, and when the vampire king saw his daughter wearing a stranger's kindness, he had to grip the doorframe to stay upright. Lucian Vale had lived through the fall of empires and the rise of nations, but nothing in 300 years had prepared him for the sight of his daughter wearing a stranger's kindness like armor. He stood in the doorway of a McDonald's at 11:47 on a Tuesday night and felt the ground shift beneath feet that had walked through centuries of careful control. The bracelet was nothing special, just worn turquoise beads on cracked leather, the kind of thing sold at summer markets for $5. But Serafina held her wrist like it was spun from starlight. Her small fingers kept tracing the pattern of stones, blue and silver catching the harsh overhead lights. And for the first time in 14 days, her face wasn't a mask of careful blankness. Lucian's throat closed. He gripped the metal doorframe and felt it buckle slightly under his fingers, heard Victor's sharp intake of breath behind him, but couldn't make himself let go. 2 weeks ago, his daughter had been laughing. 2 weeks ago, she'd run through the estate gardens chasing fireflies and demanding he tell her stories about her mother, the human woman he'd loved more than his own immortality. 2 weeks ago, the council had convened for what should have been a routine session on territory disputes and trade agreements, standard political theater that Lucian navigated with the ease of someone who'd been doing it since before electricity. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. Serafina had been playing in the antechamber outside the council doors, building a castle from blocks her mother had carved by hand during the long nights of her illness. She wasn't supposed to hear anything through the spelled doors, wasn't supposed to be touched by the ugliness of vampire politics, but the attackers had counted on that. They'd burst into the chamber with silver chains and ancient grudges, 5 vampires who thought his marriage to Catherine had weakened the old bloodlines, who believed human love was a contamination that needed to be purged. Lucian had handled them easily enough. 3 centuries didn't just teach you politics, it taught you how to move like water and strike like lightning, how to disarm conspirators while barely wrinkling your shirt. But the attackers hadn't come to win. They'd come to send a message. As Victor's guards had dragged them away, their leader had shouted the code word they'd chosen for their doomed coup, had screamed it loud enough to pierce through spelled doors and shatter a little girl's world. Catherine, Catherine, Catherine. Her dead mother's name turned into a weapon, a battle cry, a curse. Serafina had dropped her wooden blocks and stopped building castles. She'd stopped building anything. For 14 days, she hadn't spoken, hadn't eaten more than a few bites of food Lucian forced on her with increasingly desperate bribes, hadn't met anyone's eyes, including his. She moved through the estate like a ghost trying to fade into the wallpaper, and Lucian had watched his daughter disappear by inches, while the best child psychologists in 3 states told him to give her time and space and professional intervention. Tonight he'd found her room empty and felt his heart stop for the second time in 2 weeks. Victor had tracked her phone to this McDonald's 3 towns over, far outside the vampire district, where they maintained careful separation from human populations per treaty agreements. Lucian had driven here fully prepared to find his daughter hurt or taken or worse, had prepared speeches and threats and promises of vengeance. Instead, he'd found her sitting alone in a plastic booth under lights so bright they hurt his light-sensitive eyes, completely unharmed and wearing a bracelet that didn't belong to her. Now he stood frozen in the doorway, watching a human waitress who had no idea she'd just cracked open his carefully controlled world. Riley Chen was wiping down tables with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd done this motion 10,000 times, her black hair pulled into a messy ponytail, her red uniform polo slightly too large for her thin frame. She was nobody, a night shift worker at a fast food restaurant in a forgettable town, Except Lucian could see the precise moment she'd noticed Serafina. Could see how she'd paused mid-wipe, how her head had tilted slightly, how she'd walked over without hesitation and done something no one else had managed in 2 weeks. She'd seen his daughter, not the Vampire King's child, not a political chess piece, not a traumatized patient requiring careful handling, just a lonely kid eating cold fries at midnight. Victor materialized at Lucian's elbow, tension radiating off him in waves. "My lord, the protocol of separation forbids direct human contact with royal blood without vetting." His bodyguard's voice was barely a whisper, but carried the weight of law Lucian himself had written 50 years ago, when the treaty was fresh and both sides were still learning to share space without bloodshed. The protocols existed for good reasons: protection and political neutrality, and the prevention of exactly this kind of unauthorized interaction. Lucian had spent decades crafting those rules, had argued for them in council chambers and treaty negotiations, had enforced them with the full weight of his authority. "I know what I wrote, Victor." His own voice came out rough, unused to being uncertain. He watched Riley glance up as another customer called for ketchup, watched her move with easy competence, watched her exist in a world where vampire politics and assassination attempts and grief-struck children were probably just things she saw on the news. The bracelet caught light again. Serafina was touching it with wonder, the way she used to touch her mother's violin before Catherine got too weak to play. Lucian could smell emotions the way humans smelled coffee or rain, a vampiric sense that had served him well in 3 centuries of negotiation and warfare. For 14 days his daughter had smelled like nothing, like she'd erased herself from the inside out, like grief had replaced her blood with static. Now she smelled like hope. It was faint, threaded through with confusion and fear and exhaustion, but it was there, real and present and impossibly precious. Lucian released the doorframe and stepped inside. Every human in the McDonald's felt it without knowing why, the way prey animals sense predators, the way the temperature drops 3 degrees when something ancient and powerful enters a space. Conversations faltered. A teenager at the counter dropped his phone. Riley looked up sharply, and Lucian watched her eyes track him as he crossed the dining area. Watched something flicker in her expression that wasn't quite fear, but close. The fluorescent lights buzzed like dying insects. Fryer oil and cleaning chemicals and human sweat created a scent profile completely foreign to the carefully climate-controlled spaces Lucian usually inhabited. Riley's eyes widened slightly as he moved through the late-night crowd. Teenagers trying to sober up before driving home, truckers on overnight hauls, insomniacs and night shift workers seeking the comfort of salt and fat and fluorescent companionship. He moved like water through them, and they parted without conscious thought, some ancient instinct telling them to give way. Riley saw his color before she understood what she was seeing. Deep crimson shot through with veins of gold, ancient rage wrapped around something unbearably tender, like a sword made of grief. She'd been seeing emotions as colors since she was 6 years old, synesthesia that her pediatrician had dismissed as an overactive imagination until she'd described her grandmother's cancer as spreading gray shadows 3 months before diagnosis. She'd learned to trust what she saw more than what people said, learned that humans lied constantly with their mouths, but their colors never did. This man approaching Serafina's table was lying with every controlled step. He looked calm, but his color screamed barely contained panic. "Little star, it's time." His voice was soft when he reached the booth, cultured and careful, the kind of accent that suggested expensive education and old money. Serafina looked up at him, and something in her small face hardened. She shook her head once, a sharp, definitive motion, and clutched the bracelet tighter against her chest. "She gave me this. I'm keeping it." 5 words. The first 5 words she'd spoken in 14 days. Lucian felt them hit his chest like silver bullets, felt 300 years of composure fracture around the edges. His daughter had defied him. His daughter had spoken, His daughter was still in there fighting her way back. "Hey, is everything okay?" Riley appeared beside the table before she'd consciously decided to move, before Victor's warning glare could register, before her brain could catch up with her instincts. She'd spent 6 years working overnight shifts in places like this, had developed a sixth sense for situations that were about to go wrong, and something about this whole scene set off every alarm she had. A well-dressed man in a coat that probably cost more than her car, a little girl eating alone at midnight, and tension thick enough to taste. McDonald's was 3 towns over from the vampire district, technically neutral ground under treaty law, but Riley had never paid much attention to the politics of species separation. She was too busy working doubles to pay her brother's medical bills to worry about council jurisdictions. She just knew a red flag when she saw one. "My daughter would like to finish her meal. I'll pay for your time." Lucian made himself sit down in the plastic booth across from Serafina, heard Victor's strangled sound of protest, and ignored it. He needed to understand what had happened here, needed to know who this human was and why her simple gesture had accomplished what 2 weeks of the best professional help money could buy had not. "What's your name?" he asked Riley, and watched her eyes narrow slightly. "She's a kid eating fries alone at midnight. That's not a transaction, that's a red flag." Riley crossed her arms and Lucian saw her color shift, protective blue threading through practical gray. She thought he was a threat. She was inserting herself between a child and perceived danger without hesitation, without knowing that child was vampire royalty, without understanding she was currently arguing with someone who could tear her apart without breaking a sweat. It was possibly the bravest or most foolish thing he'd witnessed in decades. "Riley. And you didn't answer my question." She held his gaze without flinching, and Lucian felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Respect, maybe, or the beginning of hope. He watched her eyes track over his face, saw the exact moment her synesthesia kicked in, and she read his emotional state, saw understanding dawn in her expression. She knows grief when she sees it, has seen enough of it in this fluorescent purgatory to recognize its shape in a stranger. The gold in his crimson intensified when he looked at Serafina, and Riley caught it, catalogued it, filed it away. "So what's the deal? Custody battle. Witness protection." Riley slid into the booth beside Serafina without invitation, her tone carefully neutral. She'd seen enough broken families to recognize the shape of this one: divorced parents or separated guardians, a child caught in the middle and using silence as a shield. Serafina pushed the fries toward Riley, a tentative offering, the first social gesture she'd made since the attack. Something like that. "She witnessed something traumatic. She hasn't spoken until tonight." Lucian chose his words carefully, truth without context, facts without the dangerous details. Victor was pacing behind him, phone pressed to his ear, whispering urgently to whoever was on the other end. The council would have surveillance on him by now, would know he'd broken protocol, would be demanding explanations he didn't have yet. Kids don't stop talking because of what they see. They stop when they think no one's listening. Riley looked at Serafina with clear eyes. "What color do you think French fries are?" "Yellow. But these ones are sad yellow. Like old light." Serafina's voice was barely a whisper, but it was there, real, present. Lucian's hand froze on the table. His daughter was speaking. "Yeah, I see colors and feelings. Your dad right now, he's crimson and gold. Scared and trying not to show it." Riley said it matter-of-factly, like seeing emotions as colors was the most normal thing in the world. Lucian felt exposed in a way he hadn't since Catherine had looked at him during their first conversation and said, "You're lonely, aren't you? Despite all the power and politics, you're desperately lonely." Humans weren't supposed to see through him. He'd spent centuries perfecting the mask of controlled authority, the face he showed council chambers and treaty negotiations, and anyone who might mistake vulnerability for weakness. "What color am I?" Serafina asked Riley, and Lucian heard his daughter's hunger for connection, her desperate need to be seen as something other than broken. Right now, silver blue, like you're starting to trust something. Riley smiled, and it transformed her tired face into something warm. My lord, the council knows you're here. We have 4 minutes. Victor appeared at the table's edge, his color a sharp, anxious orange that Riley could probably read from across the room. 4 minutes before enforcers arrived, before this fragile moment shattered under the weight of protocol and political consequence. Riley Chen, my daughter needs someone who sees her. I'm prepared to offer you a contract. Lucian spoke quickly, words tumbling out with uncharacteristic urgency. He was improvising now, building a plan from nothing, but he knew truth when he felt it. This woman had given Serafina something back in 10 minutes that Lucian couldn't provide in 2 weeks. A contract for what? Therapy. I'm a waitress, not a counselor. Riley's skepticism was obvious, her color shifting to wary yellow. Companion contract. 8 weeks. You spend supervised time with Serafina. You'll be compensated generously. I don't take money for being nice to kids. That's called basic humanity. Riley started to stand, and Serafina's hand shot out, grabbed her sleeve, held on with surprising strength. The little girl didn't speak, but her eyes were desperate. Fine. But I meet her here, public place, and you explain what supervised means and why you're talking like a lawyer. Riley sat back down slowly, her eyes moving between Lucian and Serafina, trying to piece together a situation that made no sense. Headlights flooded the window, bright and unmistakable. Black sedans with council plates. Victor's phone buzzed again and his expression went grim. We're out of time. Tomorrow night, 9 p.m. I'll tell you everything. Lucian stood, buttoning his coat with fingers that wanted to shake. He looked at Riley and saw her color, practical gray shot through with protective blue and the first threads of curious silver. She would come. She would listen. She might even understand. And Riley, thank you for giving her back her voice. Riley Chen stumbled through her apartment door at 2 a.m, with her mind spinning like a broken carousel and her hands still shaking from the adrenaline crash. She kicked off her work shoes without bothering to untie them, left them where they fell in the tiny entryway, and made it exactly 3 steps toward her bedroom before the full weight of the evening hit her like a freight train. She'd given a bracelet to a child. She'd sat across from a man in an expensive coat and told him he was a bad parent. She'd watched a little girl speak for the first time in what was apparently 2 weeks and felt something crack open in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to caring. None of that should have been remarkable, except Riley couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped off a cliff without checking if there was ground below. The man had moved wrong. Not wrong like injured or awkward, but wrong like physics didn't quite apply to him the same way it applied to everyone else. The temperature had dropped when he entered the McDonald's. People had moved out of his way without looking at him. And his color, that deep crimson shot through with gold, had been like nothing she'd ever seen in 6 years of reading human emotions. Riley grabbed her laptop from the coffee table, nearly knocking over a half-empty mug of yesterday's coffee, and sat down on her threadbare couch. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. She was being paranoid. She was exhausted from a double shift, and her synesthesia always got weird when she was tired. Made her see colors that weren't quite right, made her read too much into normal human interaction. Except the little girl had been alone at midnight, and the man had talked like a lawyer, and Riley's instincts were screaming that something about that whole encounter had been deeply unusual. She typed Lucian Vale into the search bar and hit enter before she could talk herself out of it. The results loaded. Riley's phone slipped from her other hand and hit the floor with a crack that probably meant a broken screen protector. Vampire Council leader. King of the Eastern Territories. 300-year-old diplomat. Negotiated the Treaty of Philadelphia in 1975. Current head of the Council of 13 governing vampire-human relations across North America. She scrolled with numb fingers. Photos of him in formal settings, black suit and crimson tie, shaking hands with human governors and senators. Articles about council decisions on territory disputes. A Wikipedia page that casually mentioned he'd been born in 1723. Riley's breath came short and fast. She'd told the vampire king that taking his daughter to McDonald's at midnight was a red flag. She'd accused him of not listening to his child. She'd sat in a plastic booth and lectured someone who was older than the United States about basic parenting. The smart thing to do would be to forget the whole thing. Throw away the business card he'd probably slipped into her apron, block any unknown numbers, and hope that vampire royalty had better things to do than hold grudges against mouthy waitresses. Except Seraphina's face kept surfacing in her memory. That moment when the little girl had pushed the fries across the table like an offering, like she was so desperate for connection she'd reach out to a complete stranger. Riley clicked on another link. Treaty of Philadelphia established protocols for vampire-human coexistence after centuries of conflict. Vampires agreed to police their own through council law. Humans agreed to stay out of internal vampire affairs. Crossover interactions required contracts filed with both governments, background checks, vetting processes. The whole bureaucratic nightmare designed to prevent exactly the kind of unauthorized contact Riley had just initiated. She'd violated treaty law. She hadn't known there was treaty law to violate, but ignorance probably wasn't a great legal defense when dealing with beings who'd been writing laws since before her grandparents were born. Riley, you look like you saw a ghost. Daniel's voice made her jump hard enough to slam her knee into the coffee table. Her brother stood in the hallway wearing his old basketball shorts and a t-shirt that had gotten too big on him during the last round of chemo. 14 years old and 70 pounds lighter than he should be. Dark circles under his eyes that made him look ancient. But his color was still there. Faint blue-green threaded with yellow hope. Stubborn and alive. Worse. I might have accidentally befriended the vampire mafia. Riley tried to smile, but it felt wrong on her face. Daniel shuffled over and collapsed on the couch beside her, all angles and sharp edges. Cool. Did you get an autograph? He craned his neck to see her laptop screen, and his eyes went wide. Holy shit, Riles, that's the actual Vampire King. I did a report on him last year for history class. He, personally negotiated the peace treaty. He's basically Vampire George Washington. That's not helpful, Daniel. Riley closed the laptop, but the damage was done. The information was in her head now, and there was no unknowing what she'd stumbled into. Her brother was grinning, though. The first real smile she'd seen on his face in weeks. This is the coolest thing that's ever happened to anyone in our family. You have to tell me everything. What's his daughter like? Is she actually a vampire too, or is she half human? Do they really drink blood, or is that just propaganda? Daniel, I gave her my bracelet and told her she wasn't invisible. That's it. That's the whole story. Riley rubbed her face with both hands. Except it wasn't the whole story, because Lucian Vale had asked for her name and talked about contracts, and thanked her for giving his daughter back her voice. Except she'd watched Seraphina speak for the first time in 2 weeks, and felt the weight of that moment like a physical thing. Your bracelet. The turquoise one Mom gave you. Daniel looked at her wrist, and his expression shifted. Riley followed his gaze. Her wrist was bare. The bracelet was gone. She'd put it on Seraphina's tray, and the little girl had put it on immediately, and Riley had been so caught up in the strangeness of the whole encounter, she hadn't even asked for it back. It was the only thing she had left from their mother, a cheap tourist trinket their mom had bought at a beach boardwalk 3 weeks before the car accident. But Riley had worn it every day for 8 years because it made her feel less alone. Now it was on the wrist of a vampire child she'd met for 10 minutes and would probably never see again. The knock on the door came at 8 in the morning. Riley had managed maybe 90 minutes of sleep, kept jerking awake with her heart racing, and Lucian Vale's crimson gold color burned into her retinas. She stumbled to the door in sweatpants and yesterday's shirt, expecting a package delivery or maybe their landlord with another noise complaint from the couple downstairs. A courier stood in the hallway wearing all black, the kind of formal service uniform that suggested expensive discretion. He held out an envelope without a word. Heavy cream paper, wax seal in dark red. her name written in actual calligraphy across the front. Riley took it with numb fingers. The courier nodded once and left. She stood in her doorway watching him disappear down the stairs before she closed the door and turned the deadbolt. The wax seal cracked under her thumb. Inside was her bracelet, cleaned and polished until the turquoise beads gleamed, the leather strap conditioned and repaired where it had been cracking. Tucked beneath it was a contract on paper so thick it felt like fabric. Companion Services Agreement. Riley read standing up because sitting down felt like accepting something she wasn't ready to accept. 8 weeks. Riley Chen agrees to spend 10 hours weekly with Serafina Vale under protective supervision at mutually agreed-upon locations. Compensation: $50,000 paid in installments, plus comprehensive medical benefits for named family members. Her hands started shaking on the second page. Medical benefits for named family members. Full coverage for Daniel's leukemia treatment, including experimental therapies not currently covered by their bargain basement insurance. Access to clinical trials that had waiting lists 2 years long. Specialist consultations with doctors who didn't take appointments from people who lived in third-floor walk-ups and worked fast food. This is buying me. Riley heard herself say it out loud to her empty living room. He looked up my brother. He knows exactly what I need. Of course he did. You didn't become king of anything by being careless. Lucian Vale had probably known her social security number before she'd finished her shift last night, had probably run background checks that knew more about her life than she remembered herself. He'd found the pressure point and applied it with surgical precision. Daniel appeared in the hallway, saw her face, and crossed to read over her shoulder. When he got to the medical benefits clause, he went very still. Riles. This is... His voice cracked. This is clinical trials. This is the stuff Dr. Morrison said we'd never afford, so he did his homework. He's offering you a chance I can't get any other way. Sign it. Riley flipped to the last page. Companion agrees to maintain absolute confidentiality regarding all royal family matters under penalty of contract law. Contract law in capital letters, like it was a proper noun, like it was something specific and legally binding, and probably very bad to break. She spent the next 8 hours researching while Daniel went to his outpatient appointment. Contract law turned out to be exactly as serious as it sounded. A hybrid legal system that bound both supernatural and human parties on multiple levels. Breaking a contract meant exile from treaty territories or memory modification, or in extreme cases, complete erasure of identity. The supernatural community took contracts seriously because their word was literally their bond, magic and law twisted together until you couldn't separate them. Humans who entered contracts with supernatural beings got the same protections and the same penalties, which meant Riley would be bound by vampire law for the next 8 weeks, whether she understood all the implications or not. Her phone rang at 7 p.m. exactly. Unknown number. Riley stared at it for 3 rings before answering. You received the contract. Lucian Vale's voice was exactly as she remembered, cultured and careful with an accent that suggested he'd learned English before it sounded the way it did now. You investigated me. Riley kept her voice flat. I protect my daughter. That requires knowing who touches her life. No apology, just fact. You looked up my brother's medical records. That's not protection. That's manipulation. Riley paced her small living room. I offered you fair compensation for your time. The medical benefits are separate from the contract fee. Your brother needs treatment you cannot afford. I can provide it. That doesn't make this less manipulative. It makes it practical. Riley, I will be honest with you. My daughter spoke to you. She has not spoken to anyone else, including trained therapists and child psychologists. I do not understand why you succeeded where others failed, but I am not fool enough to ignore results. Riley stopped pacing. I want changes to the contract. Meetings in public places until Serafina is comfortable. No memory modification clause. And I can back out after 2 weeks if this isn't working. Lucian was quiet for a moment. The first 2 are acceptable. The memory protection stays. There are council secrets that are not mine to risk. Serafina is vampire royalty, which means she is also a political target. What you learn about our world through her cannot be allowed to spread unchecked. Then you tell me tonight what those secrets are. All of them. If I'm walking into something dangerous, I deserve to know what I'm risking. Another pause. Meet me at the east gate of Thornwood Park. Come alone. If you understand what you are walking into, and still sign, I will know you are the kind of human who might actually help her. Riley grabbed her jacket. Thornwood Park at night was something out of a Gothic novel, all mist curling through old oak trees and lamplight that seemed to create more shadows than it dispelled. Riley found Lucian standing under a wrought iron lamppost that had probably been installed before electric lighting, his black coat making him look like part of the darkness. She saw his color immediately, that crimson and gold that marked him as something other, and felt her heart kick into high gear. No bodyguards were visible, but she'd bet money they were there somewhere, hidden in the trees or the shadows, watching her approach with weapons she probably didn't want to think about. He started walking without preamble, and Riley fell into step beside him. Serafina's mother was human, a violinist named Catherine. We had 15 years before cancer took her. His voice was steady, but his color fractured around the edges, gold bleeding into the crimson, like an old wound reopening. 15 years. Riley did the math. So Serafina is 8. Yes, half human. Catherine knew what marrying a vampire meant. I offered her immortality. She declined. Lucian's hands were shoved in his coat pockets. She said she wanted to grow old with her memories, not watch everyone she loved fade while she stayed frozen. I agreed, because I loved her more than my own eternity. Riley felt something in her chest twist. That's actually romantic, in a devastating sort of way. It was devastating. Lucian stopped walking, turned to face her in the mist and lamplight. 2 weeks ago, a council faction opposed to human vampire unions tried to kill me during a session. They used Catherine's name as their attack code. Serafina heard it through the chamber doors. The bottom dropped out of Riley's stomach. They used her dead mother's name as a code word for an assassination attempt. She couldn't find words horrible enough. They wanted to prove that human attachments make us weak. That loving mortals compromises vampire security, that I am unfit to lead because I married a human and produced a half-blood heir. Lucian's voice went cold. Serafina thinks if she disappears, if she becomes invisible, they will stop using her mother's memory as a weapon. She thinks she is the problem. That's the most screwed-up logic I've ever heard. Riley's voice came out sharp. And she's 8. Of course she thinks it's her fault. Kids always think they're the problem because adults are too busy playing power games to explain that the world is just cruel sometimes. I can give her immortality, protection, empires. Lucian's voice cracked around the edges. But I cannot give her what you did in 10 minutes. Someone who sees her as just a child who needs kindness instead of a political liability, or a half-blood mistake, or a trauma case requiring management. Riley looked at him and saw his color shift, the gold overtaking the crimson until he was almost incandescent with grief. If I sign this, what happens to me? You will be watched by council conservatives. They will investigate your life, question your associates, look for any excuse to prove you are a threat, or a spy, or simply unsuitable. You will become a target by association. You're really selling this. Riley tried to smile, but it felt wrong. Your daughter held on to my bracelet like it was a life raft. I'm not walking away from that. Lucian pulled the contract from his coat, produced a pen that probably cost more than her rent, and handed both to Riley. She sat down on a park bench that was damp with mist and signed her name on the last page. The contract glowed silver for 3 seconds, bright enough to make her eyes water, and she felt something settle into her bones like a promise or a curse, or both. Tomorrow, I introduce you to Serafina properly. At the estate, Lucian took the contract back and it vanished into his coat. I thought we agreed on public places. Riley stood up, her legs unsteady. We did. But there is someone you need to meet first. The council member who has been demanding I erase Serafina's memory of the attack. He will be at tomorrow's session, and he has just been informed I have hired a human companion for my daughter. He will want to meet you. Riley's mouth went dry. That sounds like a terrible idea. It is. But if you are going to survive the next 8 weeks, you need to understand exactly what you are up against. And Counselor Thaddeus Crane is very much what you are up against. The car that arrived to collect Riley at 9 in the morning was the kind of vehicle she'd only seen in movies, all black leather and tinted windows, and a driver who wore gloves and didn't make eye contact. She climbed into the back seat feeling like an imposter, her thrift store jeans and Target clearance jacket completely wrong for whatever world she was entering. The drive took 40 minutes through increasingly wealthy neighborhoods until they turned onto a private road lined with old-growth trees that formed a tunnel of green shadow. Iron gates appeared at the end, 12 feet tall with silver inlay, worked into intricate patterns that hurt to look at directly. They swung open silently, and Riley got her first view of Vale Estate. The mansion was a restored Victorian fantasy, all turrets and gables and wraparound porches, painted in shades of gray and cream that should have looked dated but instead looked timeless. 50 acres of manicured grounds stretched in every direction, formal gardens and wild woods existing in careful balance. Riley stepped out of the car and felt immediately out of place, a waitress playing dress-up in a world that had been built before her great-grandparents were born. The front doors opened before she reached them. Marble floors stretched ahead, polished to mirror brightness, reflecting oil paintings in heavy gilt frames that lined the walls. People in period dress stared down from canvas, their eyes following her as she walked. A grand staircase curved upward like a question mark, dark wood and crimson carpet, leading to upper floors she couldn't see. Everything whispered old money and older power, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because it had been here for centuries and would be here for centuries more. Victor appeared from a side hallway, his expression as cold and professional as it had been at the McDonald's. "Miss Chen, the king is in the East Wing with Lady Serafina. I will escort you." He moved like someone with military training, economical and precise, and Riley had to hurry to keep up. 3 estate protocols. Victor spoke without looking at her. Don't enter locked rooms. Don't wander after sunset. Don't ask staff about council business. Are those suggestions or rules? Riley kept her voice neutral. Rules. Breaking them voids your contract and your protections. Understood. But Riley was already seeing things that made her skin prickle. Colors everywhere, emotional signatures bleeding through the elegant veneer. Servants passed in the hallways wearing anxious orange, their faces carefully blank, but their fear visible to anyone who could read it. Guards stood at intervals, stone-faced and steel gray, watchful in a way that suggested they expected violence. The whole house was afraid. They climbed the curving staircase and turned down a hallway lined with more portraits, more silent witnesses to centuries of vampire history. Victor stopped at a door painted soft lavender, knocked twice, and stepped back. "Lady Serafina, your guest has arrived." He opened the door and gestured for Riley to enter. Serafina's room was large and airy with tall windows that let in morning light. The walls were painted that gentle lavender, the furniture was white and gold, and every surface was covered with toys and books and art supplies. But something was wrong. The toys were arranged too neatly, organized by type and size like a store display. The books were stacked with military precision, spines aligned perfectly. Art supplies sat in labeled containers, unused and pristine. Everything was controlled, nothing was played with, and Riley recognized the signs of a child trying to take up as little space as possible. Serafina sat at a small table working on a puzzle, her dark hair pulled back in a neat braid, wearing a dress that looked expensive and uncomfortable. She looked up when the door opened, and her whole face transformed. "You came back." Her voice was small but clear, wonder threading through the words. Riley crossed the room and sat down across from her at the puzzle table. "Told you I would. Also, your dad has terrible taste in contracts. Way too many legal words." Serafina's laugh was small and rusty, like she'd forgotten how the mechanics worked, but it was real. Riley saw Lucian in the doorway, his crimson and gold color shifting as the gold overtook the crimson entirely, transforming him into something incandescent. He was watching his daughter laugh and looking like a man who'd been granted a miracle he didn't deserve. The bracelet gleamed on Serafina's wrist, turquoise and silver against her pale skin. She touched it reflexively, the way Riley used to, a grounding gesture that said, "I'm here, I'm real, I matter." Riley felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that signing that contract had been the right choice, even if everything else about this situation was complicated and dangerous. "We need to leave for the council session in an hour." Lucian spoke from the doorway, his voice careful. "Riley, there is a protected observation room where you and Serafina can watch. I would like you both there." "Watch what exactly?" Riley looked up. "A discussion about recent events. Crane will be present. He wants to address my hiring of a human companion without council approval." Serafina's color shifted immediately, silver blue draining to gray static. She gripped the edge of the puzzle table hard enough that her knuckles went white. Riley made a decision. "Then we'll be there. But if this gets ugly, I'm pulling her out." "Agreed." Lucian nodded once and disappeared down the hallway. The observation room was a narrow space behind one-way glass, furnished with 2 chairs and nothing else. Riley and Serafina sat side by side watching as council members filed into the chamber beyond. The room was circular with tiered seating rising in concentric rings, 13 high-backed chairs arranged around a central throne of black wood and silver. The architecture was designed to intimidate, to remind everyone present that they were part of something ancient and powerful and not to be challenged lightly. Lucian entered last, wearing formal robes in black with silver threading that caught the light. He looked every inch a king, controlled and commanding, and Riley saw how his color changed in public. The gold submerged beneath crimson, all vulnerability hidden behind centuries of practiced authority. He took his seat on the central throne, and the chamber fell silent. Counselor Thaddeus Crane stood from his seat in the second tier. He was tall and angular, with gray hair pulled back in a queue, wearing robes in deep burgundy. His color was rust red, shot through with black, old anger calcified into doctrine. 600 years old according to the briefing Victor had given Riley, traditional bloc leader, and completely opposed to human-vampire integration. "We must address the King's recent breach of protection protocols." Crane's voice carried easily in the circular chamber, designed for acoustics. Lucian took his daughter to a human establishment without security clearance. He allowed unauthorized human contact with royal blood. He has now hired said human as a companion without council approval. These actions violate the spirit, if not the letter, of our protective measures. Riley felt Serafina tense beside her, small fingers digging into Riley's arm. The companion contract falls under parental rights, not council jurisdiction. Lucian's voice was level, betraying nothing. "My daughter's well-being is not subject to vote. Your daughter is 9th in succession." Crane moved down a tier, closer to the center. "Her security is council business, especially given her mixed heritage." The way he said mixed made it sound like contamination. Serafina flinched. Riley saw red. "She's 8 years old." Riley heard herself whisper it. "She's a child and they're talking about her like she's a political problem." "I move to invoke the memory clemency law." Crane addressed the full council now. "We have established precedent for suppressing traumatic memories in vampire minors to preserve emotional stability. Lady Serafina witnessed an attack that has rendered her unable to function normally. For her own protection, we should erase the memory of that day." You want to erase her memory of her mother's name being used as a weapon. Lucian stood, and the temperature in both rooms dropped. You want to erase her grief. I won't allow it. Parental veto can be overridden with 8 votes in cases where the child's safety is at risk. Crane looked around the chamber. I have 7 confirmed votes. We need 8 for majority. Riley watched the council members, reading their colors. 7 rust red and black, matching Crane's calcified anger. 4 neutral gray, undecided. 1 soft blue threaded with silver, sympathetic, but silent. Lucian's crimson gold stood alone. They want to take Mama away again. Seraphina's whisper was broken. Riley, they want to make me forget her. Riley understood in that moment exactly what was happening. This wasn't about Seraphina's trauma. This was about erasing evidence. If Seraphina didn't remember the attack, didn't remember hearing her mother's name used as a code word, there was no witness to prove the assassination attempt was targeted and personal. There was no proof that someone in this chamber had planned it specifically to hurt Lucian through his daughter. They were going to erase the one person who could testify that this had been about destroying human-vampire bonds. Riley stood up. Victor materialized in the doorway, blocking her path. You can't enter council session. Protocol forbids humans from speaking in closed chambers. I'm a contracted companion. Riley kept her voice steady, even though her heart was trying to escape her chest. That means I speak for her well-being. Either let me in, or the contract's void and you lose the one person who got her talking again. Victor's hand went to his earpiece. My lord, Miss Chen is demanding entry to testify. Riley couldn't hear Lucian's response, but she saw Victor's expression shift from stern to shocked. He stepped aside. Let her through. The doors opened. 13 vampires turned as a human waitress in clearance jeans and a target jacket walked into their sacred chamber. The temperature dropped so fast Riley could see her breath. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but Seraphina was watching through the glass, and Riley had promised to see her, to make her visible, to prove that her feelings mattered. She walked down the tiered steps to the chamber floor. I'm Riley Chen, Seraphina Vale's companion. I'm invoking Clause 7 of the companion contract, my right to testify on matters of emotional welfare. Her voice echoed in the circular space. This is council business. Crane's rust-red color flared darker. You have no standing, human. Wrong. Riley turned to face him directly. I have a legally binding contract that says I advocate for that little girl's mental health. And you're talking about erasing her memories like she's a hard drive you can wipe clean. She stopped talking because she thought staying invisible would keep her safe. You want to prove her right? That her feelings don't matter, that she's just a political problem to solve. Riley looked around the chamber, meeting eyes that had seen centuries. A human waitress gave her a bracelet and told her she wasn't invisible. That's all it took. 10 minutes of someone treating her like a kid instead of a half-blood liability. And your solution is to go into her head and delete the parts that are inconvenient. Lucian was staring at her like she was insane and magnificent, his colors shifting in ways she'd never seen before. Crane moved closer. You're out of your depth. Memory clemency protects children from trauma. Then why did the attack use her dead mother's name? Riley's voice cut through the chamber. You want to erase the one thing that proves this wasn't random. It was targeted. Someone in this room knew exactly how to hurt an 8-year-old girl, and they used her mother's memory as a weapon. And now you want to erase the evidence before anyone can investigate who planned it. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Riley had just accused the council of conspiracy in their own chamber. She was either about to die or about to change everything. Counselor Mira Kane stood from the neutral tier. She was younger looking than Crane, dark-skinned with silver threaded through black hair, wearing robes in deep blue. Her color was that soft blue Riley had noticed earlier, sympathetic and thoughtful. The human raises a valid point. Mira's voice was measured. If we suppress the memory, we suppress the investigation. How do we determine who orchestrated an attack that used a dead woman's name as code if we erase our only witness? I move to table the memory clemency vote pending full inquiry into the assassination attempt. We need to know who in our government is targeting children before we start erasing evidence. 3 neutral gray council members shifted to soft blue. The sympathetic ones stood as well. The vote was 9-4, tabled. Crane's eyes locked on Riley, and his color went black as old blood. You've made a grave error, Miss Chen. Contracts protect you inside these walls. But you have to leave eventually. And when you do, you'll learn that some of us have very long memories and very little patience for humans who interfere in vampire affairs. Lucian escorted Riley out of the council chamber personally, his hand hovering near her elbow without quite touching, a gesture that managed to be both protective and possessive. The doors closed behind them with a heavy thud that sounded like a coffin lid, and Riley's legs nearly gave out. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've witnessed in 3 centuries. Lucian's voice was low, meant only for her ears. I just accused a room full of vampires of conspiracy. Riley leaned against the wall, her breath coming too fast. Tell me I didn't just sign my death warrant. You signed it the moment you gave my daughter that bracelet. Lucian turned to face her, and his color was pure gold now, incandescent and raw. But you also just saved her from losing the last piece of her mother. They would have erased Catherine from her memory completely, made her forget the sound of her mother's violin, the way she smelled like rosewood and old paper, every story I've told her about the woman who chose mortality over eternity because she loved us both too much to watch us fade. Riley slid down the wall until she was sitting on the marble floor, expensive and cold beneath her cheap jeans. Serafina burst through the observation room door and ran across the hallway, threw herself at Riley with the kind of desperate momentum that spoke of dams breaking. She wrapped her thin arms around Riley's waist and held on like she was drowning. First physical affection she'd initiated since Catherine's death, Lucian had told Riley, and now Riley understood the weight of it. The little girl was shaking. You stopped them. Serafina's voice was muffled against Riley's shoulder. You made them listen. I just got really loud in a room where I had no business being. Riley wrapped her arms around the child and felt something crack in her chest. Serafina was so small, so fragile, and Riley had just made herself a target to protect her. I owe you more than money can cover. Lucian crouched down to their level, his formal robes pooling on the floor. Name it. Teach me how to survive this. Riley looked at him over Serafina's head. Because I'm pretty sure I just painted a target on my back, and I have no idea how to navigate your world without getting myself killed. I'll assign you a protection detail and a tutor in council politics. Lucian stood, offered Riley his hand. Victor will teach you our laws. Everything you need to know to survive what comes next. Victor appeared in the hallway, his steel-gray color crackling with something that might have been respect or might have been irritation. My lord, she's human. She can't possibly learn centuries of legal precedent and political maneuvering in a few weeks. She just outmaneuvered Thaddeus Crane with 2 weeks of Google research. Lucian's voice had an edge Riley hadn't heard before. Imagine what she'll do with actual instruction. 1 week later, Riley was splitting her life into pieces that didn't quite fit together. Morning shifts at McDonald's where she served hash browns to truckers and pretended everything was normal. Afternoons at the estate where she spent time with Serafina in that lavender room that was slowly becoming less controlled and more lived in. Evenings studying council law with Victor, who turned out to be a surprisingly patient if deeply skeptical teacher. Daniel's treatments had started, experimental therapy funded by money Riley still couldn't quite believe was real. She'd gone with him to his first appointment at a facility so advanced it looked like science fiction, where doctors used words like remission and cure instead of management and palliation. Her brother's color was stronger every day, blue-green hope threading through with actual vitality. The routine with Serafina felt revolutionary in its normalness. They did homework at the small table in her room, Serafina practicing cursive while Riley helped with math problems. They drew pictures with markers and crayons, Serafina's careful, precise lines slowly giving way to messier, more creative expressions. They cooked simple meals in the estate's enormous kitchen, teaching Serafina how to make grilled cheese and tomato soup, while the professional chef watched with barely concealed horror. Serafina was talking more, asking questions about Riley's life and Daniel's treatment, and whether Riley had ever been to the ocean. She was starting to play instead of just organizing toys, building block towers that she actually knocked down instead of preserving in perfect stacks. The change was visible in her color, silver blue growing brighter and more solid each day. But Riley noticed the surveillance by the third day, black sedans with tinted windows following her from the estate to her apartment. The same car parked across from McDonald's during her shifts, figures in dark clothes watching from corners. She mentioned it to Victor during one of their study sessions. Crane's people. Victor confirmed it without looking up from the legal text they were reviewing. Legal observation under Council Watch protocols. He filed paperwork claiming you're a security risk. As long as they don't interfere directly, there's nothing we can do. Riley's apartment was searched on day 5, 2 council enforcers with a warrant that was technically legal showing up at 7 in the morning. They went through everything, opened every drawer and box, photographed her laptop and phone. They were professional and thorough and completely within their rights under treaty law, and Riley felt violated anyway. Daniel was questioned at school the same day, pulled from class by officials asking about his sister's employment and associations. Her manager at McDonald's got a visit from health inspectors who found violations that had never been problems before, wrote up citations that could lead to the restaurant being shut down. They're trying to scare you off. Daniel said it over dinner in Riley's tiny apartment, picking at the takeout she'd brought home. It's working. Riley pushed her food around without eating. Lucian offered to move them into the estate when Riley mentioned the pressure during her next visit. You and Daniel would be protected there. Under my authority. Crane can't touch you on Vale property. Riley refused immediately. You pull me into your world completely. I stop being useful to Serafina. She needs someone from the outside, someone who doesn't live in vampire politics and formal protocols. If I become part of your household, I become part of the system she needs escape from. The call came 2 days later. Unknown number at 11 at night. Riley almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. You want to know what really happened at that council session? A woman's voice, cultured and careful. Meet me at Riverside Docks, midnight. Come alone. Riley told Victor immediately, played him the voicemail she'd recorded. His response was immediate and absolute. Obvious trap. You're not going. Then it's a chance to draw them out. Riley argued, even though every instinct screamed at her to stay home and lock her doors. If Crane's people are watching me, they're not watching Serafina. Lucian made the final decision, appearing in the study where Riley and Victor were debating. You wear a tracker. You stay on the phone the entire time. And at the first sign of danger, my people extract you immediately. No arguments. Riley arrived at Riverside Docks at 11:55. The smell of salt water and rust thick in the air. Empty warehouses loomed like sleeping giants, windows broken and dark. She kept her phone in her pocket, line open, Victor listening to every sound. A figure stepped out from behind a shipping container, long coat billowing in the wind off the river. Counselor Mira Kane, the neutral vote who had saved Serafina from memory erasure. I didn't call you here to trap you. Mira moved closer, and Riley saw her color, soft blue threaded with silver urgency. I called you here to warn you. Crane isn't acting alone. He's got 4 other counselors backing a motion to declare Serafina emotionally compromised and remove her from succession entirely. Riley's stomach dropped. What does that mean? If she's removed from succession, she loses all royal protections. Mira glanced around like she expected to be interrupted. Lucian's enemies can target her without political consequences. She becomes a private citizen, not royal blood. They can do whatever they want to her. Why tell me? Riley kept her distance, aware that Victor was listening, That Lucian probably was, too. You barely know me, because you did something I haven't seen in 400 years. Mira's color intensified. You made Lucian Vale show vulnerability in public. That's either stupidity or power, and I'm betting on power. Help me gather evidence that the assassination attempt was an inside job. Prove Crane's involvement. I'll protect you in council votes. I'm a waitress, not an investigator. Riley shook her head. You're a human who sees emotions as colors. Mira stepped closer. You read Lucian in 30 seconds. You can read conspirators, too. I need someone who can identify who's lying when they testify, who can see through centuries of practiced deception. Your synesthesia is exactly what this investigation needs. What's the cost? Riley had learned enough council politics to know nothing came free. If we fail, Lucian won't be able to protect you. Mira's voice went flat. Contract law only goes so far against treason charges. If Crane proves you're working against council interests, you lose all protections and probably your memory. Riley was about to answer when she saw movement on a warehouse roof, caught the glint of metal in moonlight. Red laser dot tracking across the dock, settling on her chest. Sniper. She barely got the word out before Mira shoved her behind a shipping container. Gunshot cracked the air, silver bullet embedding in metal where Riley had been standing half a second earlier. Lucian appeared between Riley and the sniper line like he'd materialized from shadow, moving faster than her eyes could track. 3 more shots rang out, all 3 hitting him center mass. He staggered, but didn't fall, his color flaring crimson so bright it was almost visible. Silver bullets slow vampires, but don't kill ancient ones. Mira pulled Riley further behind the container. He's buying time. Victor's team swarmed the roof, dark shapes moving with inhuman speed. The sniper abandoned position, launched themselves across open air on a zipline that stretched to the far side of the river. Gone before Victor's people could reach them. Lucian pulled the bullets out of his chest one by one, silver metal that steamed in the night air. His shirt was ruined, 3 holes punched through expensive fabric, but the wounds were already closing. Healing that should have been impossible, proof of exactly how old and powerful he really was. He looked at Riley and his color was pure rage. You were supposed to call for extraction at the first sign of danger. I was gathering intel. Riley's voice shook. Mira has proof about Crane. Mira put you in the open as bait to draw out Crane's assassin. Lucian's voice cut like a knife. You were never the investigator. You were the target. And now we know Crane's willing to kill a contracted human. Mira stepped around the shipping container, her color still calm. That's a treaty violation, proof we can use. You all just used me. Riley felt something break inside her chest. Lucian, you said you'd protect me. Mira, you said you needed my help. But I was just bait for your political games. I assigned you protection. Lucian's anger fractured into grief. I had snipers on 3 rooftops. Victor was tracking your every move. But yes, this world uses people. It's what we do. It's how we survive. Then I'm out. Riley stood on shaking legs. Contracts void. I'm done being your political chess piece. Please don't go. Serafina's voice came from behind Victor's team. The little girl had snuck out with them, hidden in the back of one of the vehicles, heard everything. You're the only one who's never lied to me. Riley saw Serafina's color, bright silver blue cracking into gray static, the erasure creeping back in. The child thought Riley was abandoning her, thought the one person who'd seen her was leaving like everyone else had left. Riley's decision crystallized. I'll stay, but no more secrets. If I'm in danger, I need to know everything, every plot, every threat, every political game you're playing. Then come to the estate. Lucian moved toward the cars, still bleeding sluggishly from wounds that refused to close completely. I'll show you the investigation files. All of them. Everything we know about the assassination attempt and Crane's conspiracy. They drove back in tense silence, Serafina wedged between Riley and Lucian in the back seat. Riley's phone buzzed as they pulled through the estate gates. Unknown number, Text message. You should have died tonight. Next time the king won't be fast enough. Lucian's private study was a room Riley had never seen before, tucked away in the oldest part of the estate behind a door that looked like part of the wall paneling. He pressed his hand to the wood and she felt magic ripple outward, wards recognizing him and granting access. The room beyond was small and dark, lined floor to ceiling with books that smelled like aged leather and old secrets. A massive oak desk dominated the space, its surface clear except for a silver letter opener and a single lamp. Lucian crossed to a painting on the far wall, swung it aside to reveal a safe with no visible lock or combination dial. He pressed both palms flat against the metal and whispered something in a language Riley didn't recognize. The safe opened with a heavy click. Vampires don't trust digital records. Lucian pulled out physical files, folders stuffed with papers and photographs. Everything that matters gets written down, locked away, protected by magic older than electricity. He spread the contents across his desk and Riley moved closer, Serafina pressed against her side. Photos of the council chamber taken from security cameras, timestamps from 2 weeks ago. The assassination attempt captured in brutal clarity. 5 vampires with silver chains rushing Lucian's throne. Victor's team moving to intercept. Diagrams of the chamber with positions marked, movements tracked. Escape routes highlighted. Transcripts of intercepted communications. Careful neutral language that meant nothing on the surface but everything in context. 5 counselors led by Crane have been planning to remove progressive vampires from power for at least 3 years. Lucian's voice was steady, but his color bled crimson and black. My marriage to Catherine made me the symbol they wanted to destroy. Proof that human-vampire integration weakens our power, compromises our security, dilutes our bloodlines. Riley read through the transcripts, seeing the careful coded language, references to the Catherine problem and the half-blood issue, and the need for traditional strength. Her stomach turned. Catherine's name wasn't random. Lucian touched one of the photos, his finger tracing the moment of attack. It was a message to me. We can touch what you love. We can take everything that matters and turn it into a weapon. They knew Serafina would be outside the chamber doors. They knew she'd hear. Riley looked up sharply. They wanted her to hear, wanted to traumatize her, remove her from succession, weaken my political base. Lucian's voice cracked. She's 8 years old, and they weaponized her grief because it served their political agenda. Riley felt rage bloom hot and sharp in her chest. She's 8. They used a dead woman's name to hurt a child. What kind of monsters do that? Our kind. Mira Kane's voice came from the doorway. Riley spun, hand going to Serafina protectively. Mira held up both hands, her color soft blue and non-threatening. I apologize for the intrusion. Victor let me in. I have something you need to see. She crossed to the desk and added another file to the collection. I found someone, Crane's personal assistant, a human named Marcus Reed. He's been compiling evidence for 3 years, waiting for immunity and protection. What kind of evidence? Lucian picked up the new file. Everything. Mira's color intensified with excitement. Encrypted messages he decoded. Financial records showing payments to the assassins, and a recording of Crane explicitly ordering the attack using Catherine's name as the code word. Riley's breath caught. That's proof. Ironclad, treaty violation proof. If Marcus testifies, we can remove Crane from the council and refer him to human authorities for conspiracy to commit murder. But there's a catch. Lucian was reading through Marcus's file. He won't meet in council territory. Doesn't trust us not to erase his memory or worse. He wants neutral ground, the old church on the border of vampire and human districts. Mira pulled out a map. Sacred ground. Treaty law forbids violence there. He'll testify in front of the full council if we guarantee his protection and a new identity afterward. When? Lucian looked up. 48 hours. Mira checked her watch. The council convenes for emergency session to hear his testimony and vote on Crane's removal. Riley spent the next 2 days learning how to testify in a supernatural court, Victor drilling her on protocols with the patience of someone teaching warfare. How to stand without appearing aggressive or submissive. How to speak clearly without seeming rehearsed. How to present evidence in the formal language the council expected. It was like court training compressed into 48 hours, and Riley's head spun with rules and procedures. Serafina appeared in the study on the second day, her color determined silver blue. "I want to testify too." Lucian looked up from the testimony outline he was reviewing. "Absolutely not. You've been through enough. If I don't tell them what I heard, they'll say I imagined it." Serafina's voice was small but firm. "I need to say Mama's name out loud and tell them it hurt. That it wasn't just a code word, it was my mother, and they used her like she didn't matter. She's right." Riley put down the protocol handbook Victor had given her. "Her testimony is the emotional proof. Marcus has the logistics, financial records, hard evidence. But she has the impact. The human element that makes this real instead of just political maneuvering. They'll tear her apart on the stand." Lucian stood, his color fracturing with fear. Crane will cross-examine an 8-year-old child and try to make her look coached or confused or unreliable. Then I sit with her during testimony. Riley met his eyes. Physical support. She looks at me when it gets hard, and I remind her she's not invisible. "Victor, can that work under council protocols?" Victor consulted his notes. "A contracted companion can provide non-verbal support during testimony from a minor. It's unusual, but legal." Riley practiced with Serafina that night in the lavender room, running through the questions Mira would ask and the ones Crane might throw at her. "When you feel scared, look at my bracelet on your wrist." Riley touched the turquoise beads Serafina still wore. "Remember that you're not invisible, that your feelings matter, that telling the truth is the bravest thing you can do." Daniel called that evening, his voice stronger than Riley had heard in months. Latest scan came back. "The tumors are shrinking. Dr. Morrison said if this keeps up, we're looking at actual remission. Riley, whatever you're doing, it's working. Keep going." Riley looked at Serafina curled up on her bed, reading. At the investigation files spread across Lucian's desk. At the formal clothes he'd had delivered for the testimony. A suit in charcoal gray that fit perfectly, tailored to measurements she'd never given. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not a waitress anymore. Something else. Something that mattered. The old church on neutral ground was beautiful, in the way abandoned things sometimes are. Stained glass windows filtering autumn light into pools of colored brilliance. The interior had been converted to a meeting hall, pews removed and replaced with semicircular seating. 13 council chairs arranged in tiers, human treaty observers in the back row, there to ensure both sides followed the rules. Everyone stood as Lucian entered in full ceremonial dress, black robes with silver threading that caught the light, a circlet of dark metal on his head that Riley had never seen him wear. He looked every inch a king, ancient and powerful, and she understood why people had followed him for 3 centuries. Marcus Reed entered, flanked by Mira's guards, pale and nervous, his color anxious yellow threaded with gray fear. A council official handed him a silver oath-binding token, a coin-sized disc that would burn if he lied. Marcus held it gingerly, his palm already turning red. The testimony began with Mira asking careful questions. Marcus detailed 3 years of serving as Crane's personal assistant, meetings where they discussed the Catherine problem, plans to use her memory as psychological warfare against Lucian. He presented encrypted messages he'd decoded, printed on paper because vampires still didn't trust digital evidence. Financial records showing payments to the 5 attackers routed through shell companies but traceable with enough time. And then the recording. Marcus pulled out a small device, old-fashioned tape recorder, and pressed play. Crane's voice filled the chamber. "The child will break first. Children always do. We traumatize her with her mother's name, She becomes unstable, and the council votes to remove her from succession. Lucian loses his heir and his political support. Dead wives leave ghosts, but silent children leave nothing. The chamber went absolutely silent, hearsay and circumstantial. Crane stood from his seat, his rust-red color flaring darker. This human could be lying for immunity. He's holding silver. Mira's voice cut across the room. She lifted the oath token for everyone to see. If he lies, we'll all know. Marcus, is this testimony truthful? Marcus's hand was shaking, the token glowing faintly against his palm. Every word. Counselor Crane told me that if Seraphina Vale's memory was erased, there would be no witness. He said dead wives leave ghosts, but silent children leave nothing. He wanted to erase a child's memory to hide his conspiracy. 3 counselors who'd supported Crane looked shaken, their colors shifting from rust red to uncertain gray. One stood and moved to the neutral bench, a visible defection. Seraphina walked in holding Riley's hand, wearing a simple blue dress and Riley's bracelet. Every vampire in the room went silent, watching an 8-year-old child approach the testimony stand with more courage than most adults could manage. Counselors, my daughter will testify about what she heard outside the chamber doors. Lucian's voice was steady, but Riley saw his color, pure terrified gold wrapped in crimson control. This is manipulation, Crane stood again, using a traumatized child for political theater. I'm not traumatized anymore. Seraphina's voice was small but clear. I have Riley now. Mira asked gentle questions from her seat. What did you hear outside the chamber doors? How did it make you feel? Why did you stop talking? I heard men shouting my mama's name like it was a bad word. Seraphina gripped Riley's hand. I thought if I disappeared, if I became invisible, they'd forget about her. But Riley told me I'm not invisible. So I'm here to say my mama's name was Catherine, and you don't get to make it mean something ugly. Riley watched colors shift in the room, several counselors going from steel-gray skepticism to soft blue empathy. They were seeing Seraphina, really seeing her, maybe for the first time. Seraphina, are you sure you remember correctly? Crane moved closer to the testimony stand. Trauma can confuse memories. Children often misunderstand what they hear. I remember. Seraphina's voice didn't waver, because right after they said her name, I touched my bracelet and pretended Mama was holding my hand. I remember what I was wearing, my blue dress with the white flowers. I remember what the door smelled like, old wood and lemon polish. I remember how cold the floor was under my knees. I remember everything. Your father hired Miss Chen to coach you. Crane pressed harder. How do we know this isn't scripted, rehearsed testimony designed to sway council sympathy? Riley didn't coach me. Seraphina's voice cracked and tears started falling, but she didn't stop talking. She gave me a bracelet and told me I wasn't invisible when everyone else looked through me like I was glass. She sat with me in McDonald's and asked what color French fries were. She didn't teach me what to say. She taught me that my feelings matter. You want to erase my memories because it's easier than saying you're sorry. The chamber fell into absolute silence. Lucian was gripping his throne so hard the wood cracked audibly, splinters falling to the floor. Riley knelt beside Seraphina and whispered, You're doing so well, almost done. I'm so proud of you. Seraphina nodded, wiped her eyes, and stood a little straighter. We have documentary evidence, sworn testimony, and a child brave enough to face her trauma in public. Mira stood for her closing argument. The question is simple. Do we hold Counselor Crane accountable for conspiracy, attempted murder, and child endangerment? Or do we prove that human lives and half-human children don't matter to this council? This is a witch hunt orchestrated by a king too weak to separate personal grief from political duty. Crane's final defense was vicious. You're allowing emotion to cloud centuries of tradition. I separated them for 15 years while my wife died slowly. Lucian's voice filled the chamber. I separated them when I wrote laws that protected vampire interests over her medical needs. I watched Catherine fade because I put council politics ahead of the woman I loved. I won't separate them anymore. My daughter is my political duty. The vote was called. Remove Councillor Crane from his seat and refer charges to treaty authorities for conspiracy and attempted murder. 12-1. Only Crane voted for himself. Crane was escorted out by council guards, his wrists bound in silver that burned where it touched his skin. He stopped in front of Riley on his way to the doors. You realize what you've done. His voice was quiet, venomous. You've broken a 600-year-old political alliance. Consequences will follow. Good. Riley met his eyes. It was a shitty alliance anyway. The guards pulled him away, but Riley saw his color, black rage promising retribution. Crane was removed, but his 4 supporters remained on the council. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the war wasn't over. As they left the chamber, Victor's phone buzzed. His color went sharp, anxious orange. My lord, there's been a break-in at the estate. Serafina's room. They arrived at the estate to find Serafina's room destroyed. The door hung open, splintered at the hinges where someone had forced entry, despite magical wards that should have been impenetrable. Riley stepped inside and felt her stomach drop. Toys broken, scattered across the floor like casualties. Books torn, pages ripped out and crumpled. The small table where they'd worked on homework was overturned, puzzle pieces ground into the carpet. But nothing was stolen. This wasn't theft. It was violation. On the mirror above Serafina's dresser, written in red paint that dripped like blood, a message. This isn't over. Serafina stood in the doorway, taking in the destruction of her safe space, her color flickering between silver blue and gray static. Riley held her breath, waiting for the breakdown, for tears or panic or regression into silence. Instead, Serafina walked into the room and picked up a broken doll, one arm torn off, stuffing spilling out. They wanted me to be scared again. Her voice was quiet but steady. Riley knelt beside her. Are you? No. Serafina looked around at the mess, at the violated privacy and targeted cruelty. Because they broke my stuff, not me. Riley felt pride bloom sharp and fierce in her chest. That's exactly right. Victor's team was already reviewing security footage, magical specialists examining the wards to determine how they'd been bypassed. It took 3 hours to piece together what happened. The intruder had intimate knowledge of the estate's protections, knew exactly where the weak points were, moved through the house like someone who belonged there. Inside job. Victor's voice was grim when he reported to Lucian. Someone on the staff. Someone who's been here long enough to learn the ward patterns. They found the culprit in 6 hours total. A housekeeper named Margaret who'd worked at the estate for 2 years. Quiet and efficient and completely unremarkable. Except she'd been Crane's informant the entire time, feeding him information about Serafina's routines and Lucian's movements. She'd waited until everyone was at the testimony, used her access to bypass the wards, and destroyed a child's room as a final act of loyalty to a master who'd already lost. She was handed over to council authorities without ceremony, her color a ugly mix of defiant orange and fearful gray. Riley and Serafina cleaned the room together. Not servants, not staff, just the 2 of them. They swept up broken things and sorted through the damage, deciding what could be saved and what needed to be let go. Some toys were too damaged to repair, but Serafina kept pieces anyway, putting them in a box she labeled memories. The books they stacked carefully, even the torn ones, because Serafina said the stories still mattered even if the pages were broken. Riley, when the 8 weeks are over, are you leaving? Serafina asked it while they were reorganizing her bookshelf, her voice carefully neutral like she was afraid of the answer. Do you want me to stay? Riley stopped shelving books and turned to face her. Yes. Serafina's color brightened to solid silver blue. But I know you have your brother, and your job, and your life outside of this. I don't want to be selfish. My contract says 8 weeks. Riley sat down on the floor, pulled Serafina down beside her. But we didn't sign a friendship contract. Those last as long as both people want them to. 4 weeks later, the world had shifted into something that resembled normal, or at least a new version of normal that Riley was learning to navigate. Crane was under house arrest pending trial by treaty authorities, a process that would take months, but seemed inevitable given the evidence. His 4 supporters on the council had gone conspicuously quiet, distancing themselves from his conspiracy before they got caught in the fallout. Serafina was back in private school, a small academy for supernatural children where being half-human was unusual but not unheard of. She was making friends slowly, cautiously, learning to trust that other kids wouldn't use her vulnerabilities as weapons. She still saw a therapist twice a week, but she was laughing again, playing, being 8 in all the messy, complicated ways 8-year-olds were supposed to be. Daniel was in remission. The experimental treatment had worked better than anyone dared hope. Tumors shrinking to nothing, his body remembering how to be healthy. He'd gained back 15 pounds, his color growing stronger every day, blue-green vitality replacing the gray shadows of illness. Riley brought him to the estate to meet Serafina, and they'd bonded immediately over video games, the 14-year-old and the 8-year-old finding common ground in digital adventures. Riley's 8-week contract expired on a Tuesday. Lucian called her into his study that morning, formal and careful, and offered to extend it. Double the pay, a formal position as royal companion with benefits and protections that would last as long as she wanted. No. Riley said it before he finished explaining the terms. I'm not doing this for money anymore, but I'll visit 3 times a week as Serafina's friend. No contract, no protocol, just this. She gestured at the estate, at the world they'd built together. Then I owe you a debt I can't quantify. Lucian's color shifted to pure gold, warm and genuine. You don't owe me anything. Riley met his eyes. She gave me something too, proof that kindness still matters, even in a world of ancient grudges and political games. Riley and Lucian stood in the estate garden at sunset, watching through the tall windows as Serafina taught Daniel chess in the library. The light was golden and soft, autumn turning the gardens into a palette of rust and amber. You gave me back my daughter. Lucian spoke quietly, his hands in his pockets. How do I thank someone for that? You don't. Riley watched Serafina laugh at something Daniel said, the sound carrying through the open window. You just keep being the dad who sat in a McDonald's booth because she wanted to stay. I've spent 3 centuries building walls. Lucian turned to look at her and his color was incandescent, gold and crimson swirling together. You walked through them in a night. Because you let me. Riley held his gaze. You could have just taken her and left, but you stayed. You asked her what she wanted. You chose to be vulnerable when every instinct probably told you to retreat behind protocol and power. They were standing close enough that Riley could feel the temperature difference between them, vampire cold and human warmth creating currents in the air. She could see his color in perfect detail, still crimson and gold, but softer now, healing around the edges where grief had carved deep wounds. What do you see when you look at me now? Lucian's voice was barely a whisper. Someone who's learning that being strong doesn't mean being alone. Riley answered honestly. He leaned in and she didn't move away, the moment stretching between them like a question neither was quite ready to answer. Then Serafina's voice carried from the house, triumphant and delighted. Riley, Daniel let me win at chess. Come see. The moment broke. They looked at each other and laughed, the tension dissolving into something warm and comfortable. Timing has never been our strength. Lucian smiled and it transformed his face. We have time. Riley said it like a promise. Riley returned to McDonald's for her regular shift on Friday night, sliding back into the routine of fryer oil and fluorescent lights, like putting on comfortable shoes. Her manager caught her during her break, curious and slightly confused. Are you quitting? Rumor is you're working for some rich family now. No. Riley refilled napkin dispensers, wiped down tables, did all the small maintenance tasks that kept the place running. I like it here. This is where it started. A young vampire couple came in near midnight, nervous and hesitant, holding hands like they needed the physical connection for courage. Their daughter was maybe 6, wearing a pink dress and clutching a stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide as she took in the human restaurant like it was a foreign country. First time in a human establishment, Riley could tell by their colors, anxious orange threaded with hopeful yellow. She walked over with a Happy Meal toy, a small plastic dinosaur, and set it in front of the little girl without being asked. Welcome. The parents relaxed visibly. The daughter's face lit up with delight. Small moment, huge impact, the kind of thing that changed trajectories without anyone noticing until much later. Riley touched her wrist where a bracelet rested, different from the original but precious in its own way. Serafina had given it back with an addition. Turquoise beads and silver accents, with a small engraving on the clasp. You're not invisible either. Her phone buzzed. Text from Lucian. Council vote tomorrow. Mira's proposing a human vampire youth exchange program. She wants you to consult. Interested. Riley smiled and typed back. Only if we meet at McDonald's. I'm not giving up fries for politics. His reply came immediately. Deal. Serafina insists on coming. She says you promised to teach her to make the perfect milkshake. Riley looked out the window at the parking lot. Same fluorescent lights reflecting off asphalt. Same late-night crowd of insomniacs and night shift workers, and people seeking the comfort of salt and fat and companionship. But now she knew something she hadn't known 8 weeks ago. Every lonely kid in a booth was a chance to change a kingdom. Every small act of kindness was a crack in systems that seemed immovable. Every choice to see someone, really see them, mattered more than power or politics or centuries of tradition. Movement caught her eye as she turned back to the counter. A new customer, teenage vampire with a black eye and a backpack slung over one shoulder, sitting in the corner booth. Alone. Untouched fries going cold on the table in front of him. His color was gray static, the color of erasure, the same color Serafina had been drowning in when Riley first saw her. Riley reached into her bag and pulled out a bracelet, one of several she kept now because she'd learned that sometimes the smallest gestures created the biggest changes. She grabbed a napkin and wrote in quick letters, "You're not invisible." She walked toward his table carrying the napkin and bracelet, her heart doing that familiar, complicated thing where fear and hope tangled together. The story of Riley and Serafina was complete. A chapter closed with Serafina laughing in the estate library and Crane awaiting trial, and a little girl who'd learned she mattered. But the world they'd changed together, the cracks they'd opened in ancient systems, the proof that kindness could be revolutionary. That story was just beginning. Riley reached the booth and set down the napkin and bracelet. The teenage vampire looked up, surprised, his gray static color flickering with the first threads of silver-blue hope. She smiled and said the same thing she'd said to Serafina 8 weeks ago in this exact restaurant under these exact lights. "I'm Riley. Mind if I sit down?"